Kulin Nations, where we meet today. I pay my deep respects to elders past and present, and to all First Nations peoples, knowledges, cultures, stories, and creative practices. I'm a fifth generation colonial settler of English and Irish heritage, and I was raised on Yuin country beside the Shoalhaven River in a town called Nowra. So props to anyone else from Nowra. I also come from many generations of teachers and makers, from quilters, crafters, and builders, where I witnessed many acts of crafting, repairing, and learning through doing. But it was only through encounters with ways of designing outside of dominant narratives did I really begin to understand these moments as, I guess, my own early lessons in design. And these lessons were relational and also based in very situated practices. And I think in the same spirit of relationships and responsibility that treaty, as Marius mentioned, now really calls us forward. And here in Victoria, we're really witnessing such an important, hopeful, and really historic moment, and the passing of the first formal treaty with traditional owners. I think treaty really invites all of us to think deeply about how we live and learn together, how we design in relationship with country, and how we make space for many ways of knowing and governing. So for us as designers and educators and students, it really asks us to imagine our shared futures with care and accountability. And I think over the past decade, students in the Masters of Design Futures have really learnt to approach design in much the same way, as a practice of listening, learning, and making in relationships with others and with country. So I think as we all gather here today to celebrate 10 years of this amazing program, I really want to invite us all to honour the many knowledges we each bring, and continue learning from country, also continuing to learn from the many communities who teach us, and from the many relationships that sustain our work as designers. So thank you. Now, before I hand over to our fab panel, I really just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our Responsible Practice Award winners. So this is the first time we've run these awards, so big thanks to Marius for letting us do this within the program. And they are really an award that celebrates students who engage with design as relational, ethical, and inclusive practices. So we really wanted to honour students who have worked with care and respect across diverse knowledge systems. And each of the winners tonight really reminds us that responsible design is not only what we create, but also how we listen, how we collaborate, and how we contribute to more equitable and regenerative futures. So hopefully there's a few of us online as well. And I would like to start by awarding the Responsible Design Award, which celebrates initiatives or projects that value plural design knowledges and contribute to culturally responsive and inclusive environments, to Anna Razalingham. Congratulations, Anna. This fabulous certificate for you. And Anna is really recognised for work co-designing a culturally grounded evaluation framework with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. So we felt that Anna really demonstrated care, integrity and humility in working across difference. And her relational approach really embodies responsible design as an ongoing act of listening, learning and co-creation. So congratulations, Anna. Next up is our Community Engagement Award. And this is really recognising work that is meaningful, embodies reciprocal relationships with communities, and celebrates work that listens, responds, and co-creates with others to address shared challenges and opportunities. And that is awarded to Peter Denhatton. Congratulations, Peter. So Peter is recognised for his inquiry into accessibility design through Beyond the Sunflower, a project that redefines inclusion by placing lived experience at the centre of design decision making. Last up, we have our Ethical Leadership Award, and this celebrates leaders who act with integrity and awareness, inspiring others to think critically and work responsibly. This award is going to Rani Promestri. So congratulations, Rani. So we wanted to recognise Rani's work for their ethical leadership in advocating and advancing power literacy within non-profit governance across South and Southeast Asia. Rani really demonstrated how she navigated complexity, designing with and around power, and foregrounding equity, cultural responsiveness, and mutual learning as the foundation of ethical leadership. So congratulations to all our award winners. And I'm going to pass this back to Marius to kick us off.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much. Now I'll ask Andrea Siodmok, our Dean, Professor Andrea Siodmok, to come and do two things. One is to launch what we call MDF papers, which is a compilation of abstracts from the student work from the last 10 years, a very special piece of work, and then to move on to frame the discussion that we have in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius. I do have a very hard to say name. I once found myself in, this not being like, this is a humble brag, I guess. I once found myself in Downing Street, and the Prime Minister had a speech, and she had to read my name out. And she got partway through the speech, and I could see, because she's quite a shy lady, Theresa May, and she got to my name, and then she just froze. And she butchered it really badly, but we all kind of went, it's fine, she's Prime Minister. And then little did she know that my name came up 3 more times in that speech. So she was quite relieved when that one was over. Well, look, my name's Andrea Siodmok. I'm the Dean of the School of Design here in Melbourne. And I'd like to welcome you all, of course, to our campus here on such a special day. We are so big as a school that we can't fit in any one building, and so every year, for the last 3 years, we've taken over the library. And so around us here, in this new academic street, we have our showcase. So we're going to have some celebratory networking gathering on the balcony, but you're very welcome to wander around the building afterwards. And really, I mean, building what's already been said, and also to welcome everyone online. I think we have lots of people with a lot of interest in this topic. I said to Marius, you're 10 years old. This program is amazing. I've met graduates around the world who have studied this master's, and many of the people also here and online today. And these are individuals who are leading in their areas, they're changing the world, and this program enables them to really have some space to talk about what that leadership is. And the thing about design is it's always changing. You know, it is a mercurial thing, it moves with the times. And so really sharpening the edge of, well, where is design at? And also, where is it going next? So for us, that's about debate. I said to Marius, 10 years ago, there must have been something in the water because, you know, this amazing program came out of 10 years ago. We also have a 10-year-old master's here, the Masters of Design, Innovation and Technology. So they're both hitting those milestones where we're taking quite a big pause and we're actually looking forward and saying, what's the next 10 years going to bring? I suspect we'll have to buckle up for that one. So as Mary said, we don't want to hold you up from the exciting content of the day. But I did want to really just build on that idea of the 10 years. And Michael and I were in the lift coming up today, and I think we bumped into a renowned scientist, a professor, and a place like this opens doors and allows incredible people to cross paths. That's why our slogan is around design, technology, and enterprises, so like the fusion of those things. And over 10 years, remarkable people, as I say, have been through this program, but all through all the others as well. So in celebration of that, we're launching something called MDF, Masters of Design Futures Papers. And really, the papers themselves are a mirror of the field, of the interests of that peer community. And so they're a curated collection of extended abstracts from the actual graduates' final research projects. And they celebrate both the diversity and then also the individual curiosity and interests, if you like, of the diverse range of practitioners. So just to give you a sense, and we've built a sort of tool that allows you, or I say a tool has been built that allows you to kind of look into this and develop some kind of meta framing around the different themes that are coming out of it. But to give you a sense of a few of the projects, perhaps from the previous years. One, for example, by Ben Gill, is looking at trauma-informed design organizations. and a development model to change that in design. Michelle, Marique, Spencer was looking at design and finance, a powerful partnership that really looks at the art of what's possible and looking at when design and finance are aligned. And then also another example, Stella Vasilou, looking at seeing the earth through ethics, care, diplomacy and relationality, and of course many, many others. At the heart of a lot of this inquiry, and for me, design over 30 years, it's about how we shape the world, not only that we have, but shape the world that we want it to be. But it's also about understanding where power is and where it needs to move to. So in the context of all of that, there's lots you can actually, with a QR code, I believe, there's a way you can get into this and have a play. But these are all, if you like, the hive mind of the graduates of this program. And as we go forwards, we want to start to really open up a much broader network of leadership across design and tap into the great expertise both in the room here, but also internationally with people who are connected to this university and beyond. And through that, tonight, or this afternoon, really kicking off with this idea of, is design the missing D in R&D? And starting to put forward some propositional papers. So if as a result of today you think, you know, there's another topic we should talk about, then we're very much, our door is open for that. We furiously penned some words together a few weeks, months ago now, and that was really the impetus of tonight. So for those in the room, well done for finding it. I've never been in this room. This is the hardest room in the entire university, I suspect, to find. So your ingenuity is absolutely where it needs to be for Melbourne, because Melbourne, all the best stuff is hard to find. And for those online, I hope you really enjoy the panel. I'm going to hand over to Marius, I think. You okay to introduce?
Thank you. So now I'll invite the panel to convene. Amanda Good is leading the panel and will take us through both introductions and the sort of theme of what we're about to hear. Thank you, Amanda. Everyone has a mic?
Hello. It sounds like that works. Thank you, Marius. Hello, team. How are we? There was a good buzz in the room this afternoon as you all came in, so I'm looking forward to that energy maintaining and potentially building as we hang out with you for the next hour or so. So how this will play, and my name is Amanda Good, so I am an alumnus of RMIT, and I do feel like at some point in my life I might have given a presentation in this room. I feel like I've been here before, having some PTSD from thinking of all my imminently due papers and whatnot. So I'm an alumnus of RMIT. I have worked professionally in a design capacity for the past 20 or so years, so typically working in roles where the job hasn't existed before. I'm not sure if that says something about me or it says something about the jobs I've done, but for example, when I worked at Nova Radio Station in a digital strategy and product role, there was a new thing called Facebook that had come out, and it was threatening to take market share. And what were we going to do about that? So I've got some lived experience in the world of design. What we'll do this afternoon, though, is we've got about an hour together in this room to explore the topic around the missing D in R&D. And I'm joined by Tom, Mel, and Laura. As we come to speak, we'll give a bit of a background on ourselves and our relationship with R&D and design, but also we'll be, I guess, thinking through what is it, why is it, how is it, where, when, who. And we're definitely hoping that you're a part of the who. So I just want to touch on a few points. Like I said, my experience with design and R&D has been varied. It's been in advertising agencies and in media in probably the first 10 years of my profession. And in the latter part of my career, it's been around professional services industries and firms. So I'd be really interested to see that design and finance paper that was mentioned by Andrea. I think that would be intriguing. And I've got some observations and lived experiences. So having come from several years at KPMG and then moving across into Oricon, which is a design, engineering and advisory firm, and probably should give you a footnote right now. The words you hear from me are my own and not necessarily representative of an entire company. And likewise, that goes for Mel and Laura, who are representing themselves, but we all have some lived experience in working in our business. I'm sure you can say whatever you like and they'll take it, Tom. Yeah, all right. So when I moved across from KPMG to Oricon, one of the things I noticed was working with these infinitely capable, creative, innovative people who just saw it as solving a problem. It wasn't innovation, they were just making something work. And that's great. And so one of our colleagues, I've got some colleagues here this afternoon, thanks for turning up. One of our colleagues who was going to be here this afternoon, he can't be here because he's checking on a bridge to make sure it'll still stand after someone hit it last week. So there's this real, I guess, foundational discipline and focus on getting it right and getting the foundations right, which is great. And that's absolutely what we want from our structural and civil engineers. But there's also an element of often the problems we're solving haven't been solved before. Often the things that we're doing in working together and collaborating haven't been done before because we're responding to potentially an industrial age, an industrial structure in education and other spaces. And how do we more deliberately work together and think about the role that design can play? So when I came across to Oricon, I did notice there was some great work happening. I don't know if anyone's had the joy of being part of the R&D tax incentive program, like holler out, yes. So, and there's questions around, have you formed new knowledge? What's been the process? Has there been a hypothesis? And a lot of the capture of the information is retrospective. A lot of the capture of the information, you need to rely on your own memory to an extent, and it can be a little bit laboured in explaining what you've done. So what we did was we spent some time focusing effort and energy on, well, how are we better going to capture that information to realise that rebate at the end? And that takes us to where we are today. So there's a strategic assessment of the R&D program that the federal government's giving at the moment this year. I think they're calling it a once-in-a-generational piece. And so we will see what sort of recommendations and findings they have with relation to that. Just a bit more context around R&D and design. So in Australia, we're world-class, arguably, in research. So we're often cross-referenced. Our white papers, our PhDs are cross-referenced. But we do struggle to turn ideas into solutions that are scalable and competitive in a global remit. So that's what we've posited, that there's a missing D, and that missing D is design in research and design. And I will refer to my notes just for a few stats, because if you don't, then 87% of stats are misquoted. So only about 2% of Aussie firms collaborate with universities. That's a statistics from 2016. So of corporations, only about 2% collaborate with universities. Think about the talent and knowledge in each of those institutions that's not talking to each other, Tom. Our total R&D spend in Australia is 1.8% of GDP. If we compare that to the OECD average, it's 2.7%, and that's a statistic from this year. Even more striking, business R&D is just flatlined to just 0.9% of GDP this year from ABS. Productivity is in a state. As we may have heard from many of our businesses or governments, we need to do more with less, but how are we actually going to do that, and what does that look like? The strategic examination suggests that research is readily cross-referenced, and we have that academic eminence, but we're not commercialising it at scale. So we've got some great thinkers, but what are we doing with that? There's a saying that I often rip off another person who precedes me, and it's every system is designed to do perfectly to get the results that it's designed to get, essentially. So if you don't purposely design the system, and that's W. Deming, if you don't design the system, then you end up with what you get. So imagine if we more thoughtfully approach this. So this will bring me to my wonderful panel this afternoon. And we may have time for questions in this room, but if we don't have time for questions in this room, we will be available to all have a chat on the balcony and hang out with you all. So definitions are important. What is design actually? So part of what we've posited, so Laura, Andrea, Paul, Marius, Natalie and I, is that design is how research becomes development and innovation becomes impact. There's also, and we don't have Charles Eames' chairs here today, Marius, but I do like Charles Eames' definition around design is a plan for arranging elements in such a way as to best accomplish a particular purpose. So you have the arrangement of elements, but you also have a mission or a purpose or a stated purpose potentially. So Laura, if you can let us know a little bit about you, your relationship to design and R&D, but also your definition of design and also of designers.
Making a note because there's so much I could cover, both by describing my background and starting to answer your question. I don't want to get lost along the way. Hopefully everyone will follow the journey. I'll keep watching in the audience, see if you fade out. What do I do? What's brought me to this point in my career is something I always find really hard to define. And there's people in this audience who I know very well, and you would have heard me fumble through this explanation many, many times. The reason I find it really hard to explain what I do is because I have a really huge background of different experiences. These days, because of this context that we're in, I would say that I'm a strategic designer, and I work at CSIRO, and I enable scientists, help scientists to understand how to find pathways for impact with the amazing work that they're doing. That's part of what I do. I actually started as a spatial scientist, so if I really think about it, spatial science is also about understanding the multiple lenses you can apply to seeing the world around us and to explaining it for different purposes. And in some ways, I think it led me to becoming a designer before I even knew that that's what I did. I've also had my own startup in a data sense in the spatial industry, so I come to the R&D equation from that perspective of R&D tax incentives, what does it take, how do you get your startup to have a pathway and impact and gather momentum. And from all of that, I also worked in the CSIRO On Innovation program. I've designed other innovation programs on anything from defence innovation through to plastics, networks innovation, circular economy, energy with ARENA and the A-Lab and other things. So I've been through multiple types of innovation labs as well, and I've seen what's happened when Australia adopts a Silicon Valley approach as compared to an Australian-based approach for innovation as well. So they're the perspectives I'm bringing today. But back to your original question around definitions of design and designers. It's something that my colleague Simon Goodrich, who's in the audience today, hey Simon, and I have had the privilege of working with the Design Institute of Australia on for the past couple of years. And for those of you in the audience who are not aware, there's an official list of occupations for Australia. Yeah, an official list. And up until last year, designers were scattered here, there and everywhere across those lists. And so Simon and I have worked with many of you in the community to really start to say, well, what is it that we do as designers that makes us worthy of being an occupation group in our own right? How do we start to define what value we bring, what skills we have, what capabilities we have to offer to all the various domains that we engage with? And we had that success last year, that for the first time globally, Australia actually has a minor occupation group just of design. It's huge. The US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, some of them have design as a minor group, and if they do, they don't include digital designers. They're still over in IT. They're still listed as an occupation over there. So in Australia, we've actually brought digital, we've brought fashion, we've brought all the things you would study here at RMIT together in one occupation group. What we haven't yet achieved, though, is all of these new and emergent areas of design, things that we take for granted as designers these days. Service design, strategic design, transitions design. They're not listed in any of those categories just yet, and that's our next frontier on what we might start to do. And I bring it up because it's these definitions of what we offer that start to help to explain to others why they should engage with us and what we can help with them in the R&D space. What is it that differentiates our skills and capabilities as designers as compared to the amazing engineers, scientists, social scientists, and others that we also engage with as well? So it's that definition of design that we really need to start to nail and claim in an Australian sense so we can get more confident at explaining ourselves to everyone else.
And it's so key to name the thing, isn't it? So just to keep on this point about designers, is there a need, and have you foreseen how you will articulate the impact and the benefit? So it's great that the designers are named and classified to the extent that they are, and there could be more of that, but why would people engage and what will they get out of that?
Yeah, it's a great question about the impact and everything else. Again, until we can actually define what it is that we do, we can't start to understand what indicators, metrics, and other things we might gather to really demonstrate the impact or the outcomes that we can achieve as well. I think there's something really important for us to think through. How do we start to define these impacts in ways that mean something for the industries we engage with? I'd love to start that conversation, start to think through what are we happy to say, almost not the boundaries, but at least the basic minimums of what we agree outcomes and impacts should look like, and where design's role is in contributing to that as well. I don't know that we'll ever absolutely nail it, but it would be good to have at least 10 agreed definitions of impact and outcome.
Yeah, I've learnt working in an engineering firm, definitions are important. So if nothing else, I've taken that one. Tom, Mel, was there anything you wanted to add with relation to the definition?
I think it's fascinating that design comes up so often as that essential intermediating part of a process of generating or creating and delivering an outcome. I think it's also interesting and challenging that so design therefore is in so many different domains and different functional and category groupings, if you like. So it's both necessary but also very challenging to create the essential categories or understand how they're going to interact with a set of components in society which are constantly evolving and changing. And so one of my reflections is that it challenges us to think not only where does design fit in this process from discovery or insight through to application, but also where are the non-linear and relational elements, which have already come up in Andrea's and Marius's context. And I think that's a huge part of our exploration here.
Yeah, absolutely. The networks and how things come together. So, what life happens at the intersections, like Jack Dorsey says. So why do we design? I just read a book called The Invention of Design by Maggie Graham, and it was just published this year, and everyone seems to formally be a Google employee. They write a book and then they do quite well out of it. So she's a former Google employee, and she essentially explores the evolution of design throughout the past couple of 100 years. So she thinks about the beautification. She gives examples of the fundamentals and how things are used. She works through human-centered design. And one of her, I guess, spoiler alerts is that we love design when we are most afraid. And here she references a few periods of history. So from industrial design, or industrial revolution, we went to beauty. We looked to beautify things. The uncertainty of the Cold War, we looked to use design for problem solving. And it's quite a linear, easy story to tell, and life isn't always that way, but for the purposes of conversation, let's go with it for a moment. The social and political upheaval of the late 60s and 70s then spawned human-centric design. And the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, that some of us might have been around for, has led to designer's experience. So, Tom, while we're with you, if you could just, for those who don't know you, give a bit of a background on your role with relation to design, research and development, and also answer the question, do we need to have a crisis for us to be willing to design?
Okay. So I'm not a designer, and I'm not an academic. I came out of my upbringing in London, I was a teenager in the 80s, with questions about how ideas and creativity, new knowledge, found their way through society and how they shape societies. So I went and studied philosophy, politics, and economics, and then I found myself in a policy space. I happened to get out of university in the mid-90s, just when British politics was opening up, and all the excitement was about policy innovation, and strategic design entered into those conversations in various ways, as Andrea can relate and exemplified. But I remember that sense of excitement that a set of ideas could come, even then, through cross-sector networking, through interdisciplinary work, through long-term perspectives, through breaking out of some of the previous dichotomies and the stale paradigms of the previous 30 years. But I also remember a worry, which is really with me now, 30 years later, about the contrast between elite policy innovation and strategic design and the disaffection of everyday life from politics, from political legitimacy, from consumer capitalism, and the growth of inequality driving those deeper forces. So that led me to be preoccupied, I think probably in my upbringing, but also then in my studies and the beginnings of my career, in understanding how design and creativity could contribute to renewal of common goods and not only of personal fulfillment or individual status. And I'm still working on that challenge.
I'm interested in the role philosophy can potentially play with relation to design and how we see the world. Yeah. So I did some undergrad in it, and I remember being so much more interested in ethics than I was in metaphysics. And I was like, this metaphysics thing's never going to happen. We're not going to be talking to robots. What is this situation? And here we are, probably spending more time with the metaphysics than the ethics. So do you think it helps to have, I guess, a philosophical foundation in design? Like, what role do you see that as playing?
I think philosophical foundations are good to have and helpful. And I think of philosophy as another form of literacy and fluency alongside many of the other things we need. I think philosophy can be good because it helps us to learn how to structure a meta perspective, pun not intended, and to understand the different layers and levels of systemic processes and the ways that knowledge can be used in them. I also think it brought out for me one of the dangers and tendencies of design, which I think the Masters of Design Futures, which I really want to congratulate the program and the community and all the achievements through it that that we're celebrating, really counters. But philosophy can also encourage that idea that there is a kind of essential perspective that needs to be understood, or that we need to find the individual geniuses or the collabs that will then create our philosophical framework. Actually, I think what we've been going through, and you have kind of praised some of it, is a process of abstracting principles or understandings of different aspects of our universe and environment and our place in the systems around us, and then seeing them being overextended or misapplied or applied without context in ways that can then lead to hugely damaging consequences, for example, climate change and climate breakdown. And what philosophy can help with is constructing a better way of understanding the world from different perspectives and understanding the role of different perspectives in shaping the world, and then seeking, perhaps, approaches to design, if that's what we want to call it, or to institutional design, or to system building and system renewal or system regeneration, which are capable of treating us and our perspectives as being situated in multiple overlapping systems and needing to make sense of them through relational rulemaking, rather than trying to take an abstract set of principles and then apply them to some imagined implementation situation.
So, in short, philosophy is nifty for human-centered design.
As you said.
All right, great. Thank you, Tom. So, Mel,
Yes.
I would love to hear about you, your background, your relationship to design and research and development. And we'll come back to that, I guess, tricky question that Tom's been pondering around, does something need to be broken for people to readily embrace design?
So I have traversed design and taken many different paths, as you have. I spent 10 years working in experiential marketing and spatial design, and certainly a failed visual communicator, and really then found myself looking at transdisciplinary design through UTS, and that really opened up a different perspective for me, being able to work and sit alongside criminologists, historians, different architects, and a range of other folks, and really bring through that design process, how do we look at social challenges upstream, and how do we support organisations and institutions to reframe how they're currently seeing current social problems, and to find new ways to look at those things. I have then spent the last 15 years working in social design, service design, public policy design, both in Tokyo and London, and then back in Australia. And have really then found myself looking at social service systems, and how do we reform those? How do we really design public policy alongside citizens so that voice and agency is central to how we consider what good support looks like for our citizens and for communities. And I think in terms of my relationship to R&D, I really see it at a foundational level in terms of what are the components that we need to bring together to consider how we want to organise in society. What are the sort of ways in which we are conceptualising what great care looks like, what well-being and thriving might look like to different communities, what does the future of childhood look like, and being able to take small steps and experiment alongside communities to do that. The challenge that I see with that is then we are putting public services, particular social services, into inhospitable environments. And I think that goes back to the R&D case in Australia at a macro level, is that we have seen R&D in Australia as a linear process and not an ecosystem, and thinking about what are the different relationships that need to work in harmony to come together to build not only great products, services, technologies, but the hospitable conditions that are going to allow them to scale.
Why do you think we've seen it in a linear way?
Look, my guess is that it's come from a sort of an engineering and technology background. Even in the recent government inquiry into R&D, it is incredibly focused on big tech and on manufacturing and engineering, and how do we then consider much more of an ecosystem, life systems sort of view of complex systems that are around us, and that we need to work in that complexity. And I think that feels that we can control those things if we see them in linear ways. That said, I do think that there are functions that we can build to enable those systems to work well in orchestration.
I've read a fair amount of the material with CERD this year and responded to a couple of papers with Marius. And am well versed in reading, but found some of it a little bit dense and siloed in some ways, in spite of it having a lot of colour in the language. So there was a real call to arms as far as this is a once in a generation change that we can affect. We can't be doing more of the same and expecting different outcomes. But everything's in the written word, essentially. So how well designed and how open are we to creating a space for everyone to be a part of the dialogue? Anyone want to take that one?
I could jump in.
Yeah.
I think people in this room are actively doing that. How we then infiltrate organisational cultures and structures to do that well more broadly, I think is the job at hand. You know, we were talking before we came on in terms of what are the current challenges. We've got, I'll just name a few, mental ill health, 200 billion per annum costs. Racial discrimination, 44 billion, which is 3.6% of GDP. We've got domestic violence, 22 billion. Climate currently at 28 billion. It's supposed to be sort of 94 billion over the next 30 years. So I think the next frontier for us is to think about what's the boring revolution, as Indy says, in terms of all of those market mechanisms, the infrastructure, the organisational cultures that we now need to turn our attention to as designers.
That's great. And Tom, you've played some time in the political sphere. So how siloed is it? And this is a leading question. And how would it be less siloed?
It's less siloed with more women politicians and female leaders. It is very siloed, both by the oppositional setup of the political competition and the parliamentary assumptions, but also the policy process and the implementation and the budgeting process are set up as ritualised competitions between different institutional silos. So that's just a continuous process, and you see people kind of, you know, rushing up and down these corridors and in and out of committee rooms and caucus rooms and cabinet rooms. It's just part of the process. It becomes kind of part of the everyday. So crisis unpicks that. People behave differently in politics and government when there's a crisis that nobody can avoid. Sometimes that doesn't last for very long, or it leads to unplanned adjustments. Or, I mean, think about COVID and how many economic and fiscal assumptions were suspended, at least temporarily. But also think about robo-debt and how policy processes were distorted and, for whatever mix of reasons, abused, and law was broken in the process of implementing a technology-based solution with a series of kind of rebounding consequences. So it is very siloed, and also our institutional decision-making systems, like a cabinet system and the public service systems that we have, they reflect the design principles that help to set them up, which are sometimes 19th century colonial systems of thinking, or other sets of principles. And so what helps them to be less siloed is, one, bringing into those institutional processes lived experiences, forms of articulation, weight of numbers, voices which say the manifestation of this crisis should be impossible to ignore. But also developing new collaborative muscles. Basically, the practice of collaboration is what will help those political systems to be less siloed. And for me, I mean, that's true of city councils, it's true of big universities, it's true of definitely of corporations. So that is also an interesting way maybe of inverting the challenge and saying, can we grow the collaborative systems that would then put pressure on our political decision-making systems to mature and decide differently?
And we often operate in fiefdoms unless we have a collective goal / KPI, right? So that's a lived experience I've had in working in corporations and then looking to collaborate with externals. There's a very different cadence, priority, interest, appetite for whatever it is that the goal that you're setting. So thinking around, I guess, the where a little bit and the who's involved as well. And I want to come to you, Laura, something that you were mentioning a little bit earlier. So where does design happen? It happens a lot of places. So it happens in education, it happens in corporations, it happens structurally. It happens in Silicon Valley. So what are your learnings or observations around what's happened there and what we can learn from it, and if and how it plays out for Australia?
Big question. Might need another 24 hours, but sure, I'll do my best. Might alter the question a little bit. I've been hearing a lot in the room today. Andrea said it first, and then it's been repeated. There's something about power, and it's the power dynamics and authority and control and the incentives that are in place for existing systems. And I'm going to look across at the designers in the room and say, how many times have you heard people say, but what if they ask for things we can't deliver? Why would we go and talk to the community? Because they might say things we don't like and we have to respond to. Yeah? And I kind of think through design in that way of de-risking up front, because I'd rather know at the start of a project what the community think and what they need than at the end when we've handed something over. And there's some kind of fascination within all of this around the incentives and the power and the structures involved that really put outputs up on a pedestal at the expense of outcomes. And the big distinction is something I work on every single day and have for at least 15 years, helping people understand that, yeah, the output looks lovely, it's really shiny, it reads really great, and just like that scene in Utopia where they've printed the policy booklet first without anything in it, and they go, ooh, feels heavy, this is going to be quality stuff. And you're like, but what's it for? What's the program? And they're like, oh, we don't know, they're off doing that thing at the moment, working it out. There's this fascination with the outputs as an achievement that I think as designers, we have a role to play, but why? For what purpose? And when you start to say why and what purpose, people start to realise the power, the dynamics, the relationships. And if you keep asking why even more, you start to realise who hasn't been in the room for the past 150 years? How have these systems been set up in this way that we just accept them as the status quo and the BAU in a linear progression of some kind? It's these kinds of dynamics that I think are really important for us as designers to keep exploring and pushing the edges and boundaries of without getting super frustrated in the process.
Are we able to ask why without the cog in the wheel, the rage against the machine, the person that is going to be the initiator, the early adopter, who is going to agitate? Because that's not how we do it here.
Yeah. There's that piece around accountabilities, responsibilities, communicated, informed, and that classic racy model. Understanding where all of these dynamics play out can be really hard for the client and the key protagonist or proposer of an actual change that they'd like to see happen. And holding that mirror up is a really uncomfortable space, both for the designer and the person on the receiving end of it. So I think going back to the earlier point around having more women involved in these dynamics can really help. There's the aspect of building relationships and building those connections that's so critical to the success of any of our design practices, and it's something we need to focus on a little bit more as well.
So let's do that. What role do relationships and communities play in design and the opportunity that we've got? Panel.
Look, I think building on what you've said, I fundamentally believe centering voice and agency and communities in all of the work that we are doing is absolutely crucial. I question, though, again, if we're able to then create an opportunity for that to self-sustain. I still see, I think you were traumatising me as you were speaking.
I'm sorry.
Once that particular leader leaves, for example, you've lost the momentum, you've lost the legitimacy of the value of communities' voice in those decision makings and how you've redistributed power, and suddenly you're back at the beginning again. And so how are we creating something that's far more sticky in organisations and institutions in terms of demonstrating what the value of bringing in community voice into these processes is, so that we can continue to progress forward? Because I still see us speaking about what does co-design look like and what's its value, and what does good user-centred design look like, and yet we just keep having those conversations over and over again. So I don't think it's up for discussion. It's more, how do we continue to progress and make that sticky in our organisations and institutions so we can progress forward? And it might be something about us as designers and how do we interface with different sectors in different ways. I think there is a great act of service that we can do in terms of reflecting on how we communicate as designers, the language that we choose, and it's not always the language that I would personally select if I was talking to another group of designers, but sometimes it's that act of translation and your own leadership and your own reflective practice in how do I move this forward, and where's the opportunity to have that conversation and understanding of there is value in bringing communities into these design processes, and they are design processes, and therefore we need to apply the sensibilities and the craft to move forward in these instances.
So there's a lot of interesting threads coming through, and part of what I'm hearing is that we can be, I guess, so language is important, outcomes and impact is important, and potentially tying that to business language or the language of your stakeholders is key. But then also there's arguably a conservatism that exists, and there is a reason and rhyme as to why people will rise through the ranks. So mitigating risk, safe pair of hands, not necessarily, doing things differently, which is part of, I guess, what we all itch to do as designers and philosophers. So what do we do with that, Tom? If that's the space in which we play, that sometimes arguably we are still a little bit safe, but we do see that there is a potential and a need to go about it a different way. What role do we, designers, communities, have in that?
Well, trying to answer that question while building on and responding to what we've just heard, maybe we need to design for relational systems. And in order to do that, we need to learn how to design relational systems. And for me, as the years go by, I find myself more leaning towards away from human-centered design, not because of the design elements, but because of some of the individual human behavioural elements or the distortions of where we are, and towards living systems. We need to understand ourselves in living systems. Our institutions, by which I mean, finance, government, policy, but also the way that we all function, they're dominated by approaches to design and approaches to delivery which take nature and culture for granted and rely too much on functional definitions in order to set up relationships between different parts of the wider system. So I think perhaps what we need to do is to learn how to design relational systems through mass iteration. And that partly also involves moving away from relying too much on strategic consultancy, although you might have some views on that.
I'll just go.
The types of strategic advice we rely on, although which become cool in any given era, they reflect what's also going on around us. And we've tried out many of these different models and options, but I think one of the big patterns we see is so-called mainstream or recurring institutions becoming dependent on the delivery of strategic consulting advice, which doesn't actually change their underlying capacity to innovate or to adapt. It becomes an unhelpful form of dependency. And it's not to say that strategic advice or disruptive advice or focused creative consultancy or different forms of practice are not needed, but there are many different patterns of it. So I guess I can say, to try to use an honest and an embedded example, this is one way of thinking about RMIT. RMIT is a lot of buildings, and it's quite a lot of schools and some colleges as well. We can think about it in functions, disciplines, fields, and so on. But RMIT is now more than 99,000 enrolled students. So the humans of RMIT, before we get to staff or associates or alumni or anyone else, are actually the scale of a small city. And I was looking at some of those beautiful visualizations that come from the master's program, which turn out to be network maps and visualizations of different kinds, as well as very beautiful forms. Understanding how we can iterate by encouraging participation and interaction between these many different people, all those amazing varied people, that is reflected, for example, in our strategy, which is one thing that I have some responsibility for working on. So our strategy to get through the 2020s makes a conscious choice not to say our strategy is based around pillars, which is a certain kind of metaphor. It says our strategy is built around a community, an open, diverse, and collaborative community. So then we need to undertake practices and find ways of gathering feedback and taking decisions and trying out design prototypes which reflect all of that. And there are dozens or hundreds of ways of doing that. And alumni of this master's program are, potentially expert practitioners in helping to navigate and further extend those methods.
So as a strategic consultant, one of the tools, and the how is important. So I've run and been a part of, and some of you in the room have been a part of, many workshops, think tanks, design thinking, brainstorms, and sometimes it just feels like Post-it notes in the wind. Everyone has a great time, there's a good vibe, people eat scones, and then what happens next? And so one of the tools or frameworks that I've been playing around with is the systemic innovation framework, which I like because of what goes around the middle. So there's the orientation and vision setting. There's connections and relationships, which we've spoken about quite a bit. There's leadership and storytelling, and there's continuing the journey. And so what I've learned in my life is that unless it's really clear why you're in the room and you have a consistent narrative that people are on board with, and they understand the vision and they buy in and they've helped to deliver that, when you ask people at the end of the day what happened or at the end of the project, they'll be like, the lighting was a bit weird, the catering was late, that person was really annoying, and they're not actually talking about the project or the mission. And so it's still work in progress. And I do find that sometimes as designers and as creatives, people can get very tied to the craft or a tool or a way, and it's all important, but it's not just about the language or knowing that and speaking that, it's what you do with it. So the value of the idea lies in the using of it. We've talked about the importance of community. What other ways have we experienced in our careers as to how design works well? Like, when have you been a part of a great, energising, productive design process?
Aren't they all amazing, energising? I think I have, I'm really lucky with the role that I have, that they can all be energising in different ways. And I try and think through the idea that what hinders your task is your actual task anyway. So even as designers, we can head into the room with an intent in mind and hear from everyone else their own intent and realise actually there's something getting in the way. We can't even start on this journey yet because of what's going on in these dynamics in this room. I don't know how else to answer the question except to say that we have a role to play in making people comfortable with the uncomfortableness. We have a role to play in saying that we're not post-it note cowboys and that we have some skills behind us. But I think we have to really critically examine how we might turn up in an R&D environment and say, in R&D, do you want to actually redistribute power? Is that what R&D is about? So we can involve our communities, but can we redistribute power? I don't know if that's in our remit just yet.
Might take a slightly different tact. Look, all the projects that are similarly, I think they all sort of give me joy in some way, even when you're banging your head against the wall in terms of how to progress. And I would agree that if something's in the way, that's really the job. And I do wonder, at a practitioner level, rather than at a sort of systemic level, whilst I believe that naming the value of design and defining it for ourselves, at a systems level is incredibly important. Getting stuck on that at an individual level in your role can hinder you, I think, in terms of what your role is. Sometimes your role is walking into a room and finding a common narrative. Sometimes walking into a room and supporting someone to let go of 40 years of how they've seen what their role is in the homelessness system is. And, I can tell you, design school did not prepare me for those things. I'm sure that's very different here. But it didn't prepare me for those things. And so how do you continue to let go of, the ego of being there to design the thing, and realise that sometimes it is, most of the time, it is about how you are in relationship with the challenges, with others and their knowledge and what they're bringing. And I think that's an incredibly important part for us at a personal level and at a systems level, is how do we become that translator of knowledge in systems, and support people to let go of things that they've held on to for a long time in terms of how we see particular social challenges or how we live our lives or what we define as good care or good well-being or good education. There is going to be emotion in those things, and being able to be okay that I'm not known as the designer in that room, it feels important. And at the moment I have a policy-making role, and I'm sure most people don't know I'm even a designer, but it's how are we acting in between all of these systems, in the complexity, and acting in covert opportunities to really bring all of this new knowledge to life. And if we can do that at scale, I think then we've got a chance to think about what does productivity? What does abundance, what does thriving look like in Australia?
So there's an element of the and also what I'm hearing is maybe as designers we need to add to our toolkit the book, I think it's Robert Greene, 48 Laws of Power. If anyone hasn't read it, it's kind of disturbing but very telling as to how people operate. So we're nearing time, and I guess the initial exam question was that design is the missing D in research and development. So as any sort of final thoughts with relation to who and how we can get involved in embedding and designing for design, I'd be interested in any shares from each of you, starting with Tom, please.
Thank you. Well, I'll go to an obvious manifestation, which is our commitment to remaking urban precincts, particularly around here, as a participatory and also a long-term regenerative design process. So many of the things we've been talking about and the need to recognise that most people in the world live in cities, that our thriving in an abundance and also our regeneration of natural environments are going to have to happen through urban systems in many different ways, interacting as they do with the wider ecosystem. And then the fact that this neighbourhood where we are and where RMIT has kind of sprawled, but also RMIT in Hanoi, in Bandura, in Barcelona, that creates amazing opportunities for us to experiment with a non-linear approach to strategic design, research and development, but it's also an opportunity to treat education and civic participation as an equal, even a democratic element of the process.
Can you remind me the question again?
So just any, I guess, closing thoughts with relation to how do we help ourselves and the people in this room and outside of this room to embed design in research and development?
Look, I'd probably say first and foremost, I do believe in the premise that design is a missing link, and I think it comes to your paper in terms of it being a bridge, and how do we continue to act in translation of different sectors and across sectors and in between communities at different scales. Scale feels important in this conversation, and how we act across those scales. By acting in that translating role, I think we can unlock different forms of knowledge that is not ourselves, our own, but the broader set of knowledges and wisdom around us. Unlock imagination and bring those different perspectives of how do we want to live in the future to the forefront, so that we're actively running towards those rather than sort of pushing them uphill. And I think we need to be more in terms of in the action space and being able to experiment and demonstrate and show by doing, and design the boring bits. It's time to design the boring bits too.
I like that. And you do it by doing it, right? Laura?
Okay, so the question was, how do we embed ourselves? I'm already embedded, yay. So my reflections on this are around taking a really affiliative approach, which I think we're very good at as designers. And the affiliative approach is adopting the language and the approaches of the people we're collaborating with, engaging, enabling and supporting. And that affiliation is about finding similar language. So in a scientific sense of R&D, it's all about hypotheses and experiments, right? These are assumptions and prototyping and testing, right? So finding ways to communicate that what we do is what's already happening. It's just a different lens and a different approach, and it's an approach that can be built in to deliver even more outstanding results. That kind of stuff is really important. And there's another part about our language that I think is particularly important too. There's particular language that gets used that's really exclusive and exclusionary. Everyone who's worked with me knows that I refuse to use the term ideate. I just can't do it. I refuse, because it doesn't make sense to anyone who's not a designer. It just does not. What is ideate anyway, right? It's a nonsense word in other domains. So that affiliative approach of finding common language is really important. And distinguishing ourselves is also critical, because when you have approaches that prevail around fail fast and break things, you can't apply that in social service areas. You can't go out and break people. It's unethical and immoral. And so finding other ways of explaining what we do that works in those domains and is ethical is also something we really need to work on.
So we almost need to apply human-centeredness to ourselves in how we show up to others that we're collaborating with in using the language.
Potentially. I shy away from human-centred as well for the reasons described before. I think it's really egocentric and we need to really consider our impacts on the environments around us and not take resources as an unending source of stuff we can always just extract and use. So yes, there's something around, I know there's lots of conversation on this already. What's beyond human-centred is another question that's an obvious conversation happening in the domain at the moment anyway.
Yeah, and RMIT is at the centre of that with the Regenerative Futures Institute opening next year, which is very exciting and new, Chris, over there. So we've got time for a couple of questions, which I'm thrilled by. So just if I recap on some of what I've heard this afternoon, we've talked about the importance of language. We've talked about where power sits and stays and how it is used and distributed. We've talked about not necessarily being too precious with our own processes and the opportunities that we have, but it's yet to be designed. So the floor is yours. Anyone got any questions for us? Oh, right there, right in front of the camera. How apt. Thank you.
Okay, awesome, thanks. I'm very pleased to hear that you started to talk about experimentation in your wrap-up summaries, because my question was, you've spoken of linear models and colonial stalemates of progress, as well as speaking of an Australian innovation culture, breaking down silos and engaging community more, and viewing ourselves as an antipodean entity of its own right. Do you feel that we in Australia have a fundamental lack of experimentation culture and fear of failure more so than others? That we, government, enterprise, whatever, have to get it right the first and only time before we would scale or even invest outright? Are we conservative to our own detriment? Are we just too uncomfortable to be uncomfortable to pursue purpose?
All right, I'll take this first. So I feel like I'm out of a gig. You can take this seat next time. It's a great question. I totally agree. I think we are absolutely too conservative. I have heard many people say that there is a benefit, and it's to our benefit and detriment that we are so isolated as a country. So it's protected us in a lot of ways. We have a reliance, potentially an over-reliance on digging up the earth that we live on. And because of that, we haven't had the need or the drive or the issue to do things differently. And so that was part of, I guess, the questioning that I had is, do you need some people to light the fire for it to change, when wholesale, my perception at least, is that we can be quite conservative. So I support your question, but any other thoughts?
I agree, but I think we are constrained by the heritage of our institutional culture, if I can put it like that, and the way that you put the question. However, in order to grow a different part of my brain and mind, I'm working on music in Melbourne at the moment and exploring the history of how some kinds of music, First Nations music, soul, blues, and others, has grown through Melbourne over the last 50 years. One feature of that musical movement and its interaction with the city is it's a quality of those Australian musics that people just have a go. They're versatile, they improvise. Improvisational culture is actually a fundamental quality. It's interesting in the context of the saturation coverage that AC/DC just got this week, which is great. My brother-in-law is a rock drummer. You know, rock is amazing, but rock is also overexposed in the Australian imaginary, if I can put it that way. She's going to hit me now. Maybe not.
Oasis was awesome.
There you go. But it maybe in order to discover, and those musics are not settled, formed, or constrained as being Australian. They're still quite young and growing and evolving in lots of different ways. So I think we are constrained in the way that you asked about, but I think we could be less constrained by listening differently.
Thanks for the question. We will have another, please. Yes.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about various parts of design. When I think of design, a lot of it is with intention, that we do things with intention as designers, and as well as a big part of our work is in activism and advocacy for ourselves, for community, for our work. We exist in a time that has sort of evolved from this desire from sort of from data and statistics-driven solutions to things, to sort of mathematically driven rather than design-driven kind of implementations of sort of solution finding, AI being a big thing of this. We're moving away from, it feels like in a lot of places where we would usually look for more intentional design-based solutions, we are now looking at the sort of kitchen sink approach of applying statistical methods, AI, to these problems, and sort of deprioritizing design from this. In this new world that we're sort of now emerging in a workplace, how do you see sort of advocating for, even before bringing community in, to bringing even ourselves into the conversation?
I think why is important. I think a lot of people will throw the kitchen sink and they'll say we need to AI because AI, or we need to do this because this is what we've asked to do, to a sense. But then going to, well, why are we doing it and what is the need? But Laura, Mel?
I love this question because in my career so far, I've lived through the hype of blockchain, I've lived through the hype of digital twins, I've lived through the hype of a lot of things that everyone's going to say fundamentally changes how we work. And I'm not saying AI won't, it already is, right? It already is. But I'm really pleased to say I know amazing designers working in AI to build codes of ethics and to build these principles collaboratively and design these principles of how and where it should actually be applied and for whom and for what purpose. And I know the Australian government yesterday released a whole new policy on AI in federal government agencies as well. So I know they're taking this question quite seriously around what does it mean to live in a world that has AI, and what does it mean for our communities as well. So it's not really an answer to your question, more adding some information around the fact there are people doing stuff in this space at least, which is awesome. If it's enough, I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I don't want to find out that it wasn't enough in the future. I'm not waiting for that moment, but I might hand over to my other colleagues here.
I think of something that Tyson Yunkaporta speaks about in terms of overthinking and underfeeling. And for me, to your question, Ruby, hi, how do we continue to think of living systems and our place in that feels incredibly important as we progress in terms of conversations around AI. You know, there is, Andy Clark talks about a sort of extending minds through AI, and I wonder what does extending hearts looks like in that, and how do we consider what does extending our principles, our patterns of what good care looks like through these technologies, and centering ourselves not as human-centred, but how do we exist on country in relationship with planetary boundaries that are sort of terrifyingly being overshot at this present time, and what does that mean for our own practices and how we show up in all of these everyday settings. feels an important thing for us all to continue to reflect on.
So, like all good designers, we've probably raised more questions than answers today. And I would love to thank our esteemed panel, the thoughtful responses that we've had from Laura, Mel, Tom today. So, round of applause, please. Just a couple of things from me. Thank you for the opportunity. I've had a great time. I hope you have had too. And we would love to see you at the balcony to chat further and appreciate your enthusiasm and you joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Marius.
And just from me, thank you very much, Laura, Mel, Tom and Amanda. I really want to particularly commend Amanda's work behind the scenes. She's done a huge amount of work on responding back into the Strategic Evaluation Research Development Document, CERD. And that has set the platform for this conversation. Amanda also came up with the perfect design is the missing D in R&D statement, and I think it's driven us here, which I think is fantastic. What it's also done is open up this conversation. And so what we will do across 2026 is take a lot of these topics that have come up today and the many more that will emerge and start to put them into conversations. We run, as part of the Master of Design Futures, we run the Work Out Loud sessions. They're online sessions. We use those as probes into what's happening in this type of design around Australia, but also globally. And I think this is a particularly interesting one to pick up on. So thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda, as well. Andrea. Talk about getting names wrong. I know. I was. Thank you for supporting us in this. Thank you. And two just personal thanks. Paul Fairhead, who's been very diligent from anything from the concept through to moving chairs. And a personal thanks to Gemma Quinn, who's come in at a last moment and just gave a whole range of really intelligent suggestions. And of course, thank you to all of you who've come along, all of you who are online. We really appreciate it and look forward to your company in the future.